Hi everyone, welcome to Let's Learn ES6. My name is Ryan Christiani. In this video series, we're going to go over some of the new features available to us in ES6. In this episode, we'll be looking at the arrow function. Now, before we get into the ES6 arrow function, I just want to talk about where the inspiration for that function came from, where the inspiration for that syntax came from. And that inspiration came from CoffeeScript. You'll find it in the description below two links, one to a JS Conf 2011 talk and one to a blog post from Brendan Ike. I'll let you peruse those, but they kind of explain and talk about how CoffeeScript and JavaScript users in general helped shape the new syntax and the new features coming to ES6. But first, let's look at CoffeeScript before we get into ES6 version. So first things first, we'll be using JSBin. So if you go to jsbin.com, and we just want the JavaScript and console tabs open. You might see something that looks like this. In the top left of the JavaScript tab, you'll see a little drop down if you click it, and we can pick a different transpiler. And a transpiler is simply something that takes code that compiles to JavaScript and actually compiles it to JavaScript. We've been using ES6 since the last video. We'll use CoffeeScript for a second here. So in CoffeeScript, there's this arrow syntax when we create a function, and it looks something like this. So we'll create a function that adds two numbers together. And because CoffeeScript is all about new lines and tabs, we don't need to put any parens here. It's parens free. We can say A plus B. And if we just, want this to go to the console, I'll put some space around this. We can just say add, let's say, 2 and 3. So we'll get 5. And I don't need that semicolon. So if we just hit run, run, we should see 5. So where does this differ from the ES6 syntax? Well, first of all, let's change CoffeeScript to ES6 here. Let's change this to say let. And one of the biggest features is instead of this little skinny arrow, we just have this fat arrow. And we'll just put in parentheses here. We'll say return A plus B. So this is great. So the real syntax here is this fat arrow function and our parentheses. Everything else kind of looks the same. However, the one key thing is we no longer have to use the function keyword. So we no longer have to use that 8-letter keyword that people seem to have a little bit of an issue with. The great thing about arrow functions, and actually before we go on, I'll just verify that that in fact works. Looks great. The great thing about arrow functions is there's actually a couple different ways we could write these. So if you look at this function here, this add function, it's a pretty simple function. It just returns the value of A plus B. So within arrow functions, if we have a single line statement like this, there's actually two things we can get rid of here. We can actually get rid of these parentheses, move this up to a new line, and remove the return statement. So if I just clear this and hit run again, we should see 5. So when we have single line statements like this, we can actually have an implicit return. So we can actually create a very simple little syntax here, a little function, and make it look real nice. This is pretty great, and you're going to see a lot of this whenever you're doing maybe functional programming. So let's remove this and take a look at this example. Let's say we have some numbers, and it's just going to be an array of numbers like such. And let's say we want to use the map function to map over this array and just double the numbers and have map return a new array that is the doubled number. So let's say we have let doubled equal numbers.map. If you have never used map before, map simply just takes an array. It's an array method, so it takes an array and will run a function on each element inside of the array, returning whatever result you want. So you transform the data, and the map function will, in fact, just return a new array and store it inside of this doubled variable. It doesn't mutate this array, it just returns a new array. So if we weren't using the arrow function, it might look something like this. And we'll just call it n in here, and maybe we want to return n times 2. And if we just console.log doubled, if I could spell, that looks okay. You'll just see 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14, which is just a double of that array. Now, this is not like super nice. I mean, the function we need to put in the map is very small, very simple. This could kind of get a little annoying. I mean, it's not super annoying already, but we can actually make this nicer. So if you remember, if we have a single line statement like this, we can just have the arrow function on one line and make it really small. So let's remove our parentheses first. And let's remove that return keyword. And let's bring it up. If we remove the function keyword, and just simply put an arrow right here, oops, a little too far, we now have this really nice little function. If I hit clear and run that again, still does the same. Oh, I have semicolon there. There we go. Sorry about that little bump. This is great, and it's a single line, a quick transformation of our data, we're getting it back. In fact, if we just have a single parameter, a single argument in our function, we can just remove the parentheses all around it, and it'll do the exact same thing. This is great. So I think arrow functions are going to play a really powerful part in sort of using JavaScript as a functional programming language and creating these really simple one-line statements. One place where arrow functions are going to be a little bit tricky is when it comes to stuff like the this keyword. So typically, let's look at a little example here. Let's create a person object. So by default, when you have an object, any methods on that, this keyword inside of said method will be bound to, actually, we'll just do it like this so it makes a bit more sense. Will be bound to the object. So if I go console.log, and let's use our template literals from before, and we'll say, actually what we'll say, hi, I am, and then this dot name. So it should just say, hi, I am Ryan. If I could type. There we go. So if we just say person dot say name, there we go. Clear and run. We see, hi, I am Ryan. Perfect. That's pretty cool. But maybe we're like, oh, I want to use this new arrow syntax, so I'll just go something like this. Looks nice, small, great, right? This, you're assuming, should be person. However, not quite the case. Error, cannot read property name of undefined. So arrow functions have what's called lexical scope. I like to think of it simply as lexical scope being sort of parent scope. So in the case of an arrow function, the scope is not going to be our object, but it's going to be sort of whatever the this keyword was bound to before that. In this case, it's going to be maybe something like the window. So we have to really keep that in mind when we're using arrow functions. We can't just go ahead and use these on methods right away unless we know for a fact that we want this to be something else. Thankfully, if you watched the last video, you saw that we could actually have this really short method signature. It looks something like this that will still do, if we clear this, exactly what we want. We no longer have to type the function keyword. This is effectively the exact same as this. But one place that this will be really, really nice is if we do an example like this. So let's change this a little bit. We'll put a hobbies array on here. And this will be sort of like a yearbook, a high school yearbook. Ryan likes robots. What else do I like? Computers and internet. Internet. Looks good enough to me. And let's have a show hobbies method. We'll just do this syntax here so that we explicitly see that we're using this anonymous function, the regular way of writing a method. And let's say that in this show hobbies method, we wanted to simply print out Ryan likes robots, Ryan likes computers, Ryan likes internet for each hobby in that array. So we're going to use the for each method on the array. So we could do this dot hobbies dot for each. If you've never used the for each method, similar to the map method, it takes each element in that array and we'll just run a function on it. In this case, it doesn't return a new array, it just runs a function for each item in there. And let's use our template literal syntax from before to say this dot name. If you're unsure as to what this syntax is, watch my previous video on let const and template literals and it'll make more sense for you. Ryan likes, and then we'll say, hobby. So in the for each method, oops, if I can, give me a second. In the for each method, it takes a function that gets past each individual element. So hobby will first be robots, computers, and then internet. So I can simply just put that there. So this looks pretty good. And if you might be like sitting there screaming like, no, it's not going to work. Let's just see what happens first, and then we'll talk about what's going on. So if you hit run, you're going to see again, actually, I'm going to have to change say name to show hobbies. Clear that and hit run. You'll see JS bin output, likes robots, etc., etc. So the this keyword inside of here, and I'm just going to put some space around it so we can really see what's going on. This keyword inside of our for each function does no longer refer to person. It doesn't refer to what we want it to. This .hobbies up here refers to person.hobbies, but the binding of this has changed. It's changed to be completely different. However, if we want it to be the parent scope, we want it to be that person object, we actually just change this to be an arrow function. We can actually make it so that it's a lexical scope that is going to be the parent scope, so whatever this was bound to inside of the show hobbies method, and this in that method is person. So now if you run this, you get this simple thing. So that's going to become really helpful and really handy way to get around that. Now, if we hadn't done that, I'm just going to undo this for a second. If we hadn't thought about that, there are a couple ways we used to do this. So people used to say, maybe say, create a variable called that or self, for example, and store the value of this in there. And that way you could go ahead and say self, dot name likes hobbies, and self would refer to this, and that would ultimately be person. However, we no longer have to do that. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We can simply just say this dot name. You can see typing is my biggest issue. Just gonna remove that, and we'll go back there. Actually, if you remember, we don't even need the parentheses around the name hobby there. Clear that, hit run, and we get what we want. So I hope you learned something about arrow functions. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at spread operators and the rest parameters. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, rchristiani, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.